4 hours of darkness, how a blind American soldier stopped 200 Japanese troops. Quick question before we start, and I want you to really think about this. If you went completely blind right now in the middle of a life or death situation, what would be the first thing you'd do? Fight or flight? Comment below, because this Marine's answer will shock you. August 21st, 1942, 1:30 a.m., Guadalcanal. Al Schmid is 21 years old, positioned behind a Browning M1917 machine gun. He's eating a piece of hardtack when he hears a metallic clink near his feet. A Type 97 Japanese grenade. He has 1 second to react. The explosion doesn't kill him. It does something arguably worse. Every blood vessel in both eyes ruptures simultaneously. His retinas detach. His world goes from jungle darkness to absolute void in less time than it takes to blink. But here's the thing nobody tells you about that moment. Al Schmid doesn't scream. He doesn't panic, because through the high-pitched ringing destroying his eardrums, he hears something that makes his destroyed eyes irrelevant. Splashing. Not one soldier, not 10, hundreds of boots hitting water. The Japanese 28th Infantry Regiment is crossing the Tenaru River right now, and they think his gun is silent. They think he's dead. In the next 4 hours, this blind Marine will kill more enemy soldiers than most entire platoons kill in a year. He'll fire 1,087 rounds without seeing a single target. He'll be guided by whispers, vibrations, and something the Japanese will later call supernatural. By dawn, the river will be so clogged with bodies that the water flow will actually change direction. This isn't a feel-good story about overcoming disability. This is a technical breakdown of how a human being became a guided weapon system, using senses you didn't know could do this. Let me show you the science of fighting blind. Colonel Tenaru Ichiki wasn't an idiot. He commanded 917 elite troops who'd slaughtered their way through Manchuria and China. His night assault strategy had never failed. 900 soldiers with fixed bayonets attacking at 1:30 a.m. when human reaction time is at its worst, when fear is amplified, when the Americans would be half asleep. The math was simple. Overwhelm, terrify, break through. But Ichiki's intelligence reports had one critical flaw. They said the Americans were soft city boys who'd never seen real combat. Al Schmid was a steelworker from Philadelphia who'd spent 3 years operating industrial machinery in conditions that would shut down a modern factory. 12-hour shifts in 110-degree heat, hands so calloused they were basically leather. And here's what makes the Browning M1917 absolutely terrifying in the right hands. It's not a gun. It's a water-cooled death machine that can fire continuously for hours without the barrel warping. 450 rounds per minute, but only if you know the exact rhythm of the belt feed, the precise moment to add cooling water, and the specific vibration frequency that means it's about to jam. Schmid knew all of it. He'd fired 50,000 practice rounds. His muscle memory was so deep it bypassed conscious thought. When that grenade went off, his hands were already on the grips. Johnny Rivers, his loader, dies instantly. The kid's last action is trying to kick the grenade away. Lee Diamond, the spotter, takes shrapnel through both shoulders. His arms go completely numb. Nerve damage, he can't move them at all. Schmid's face is shredded. Blood fills both eye sockets. And here's the exact moment that separates Schmid from almost every other human being. He reaches up, touches the wet mess where his eyes used to be, and his brain makes a calculation. Vision equals 0. Hearing still functional. Touch still functional. Gun still operational. Mission unchanged. He doesn't crawl away. He settles deeper into firing position. And then Lee Diamond does something that will save hundreds of American lives. With his arms completely useless, bleeding from his back, he becomes Schmid's external targeting system. Al, River, 11 o'clock, range 50 yards, shouts, "Fire!" Schmid pulls the trigger. But here's what nobody explains about firing blind. Schmid isn't randomly spraying bullets. His brain is building a three-dimensional sound map in real time. Every splash, every scream, every breath, every metallic click of equipment. His auditory cortex is processing spatial information faster than most people's visual cortex. He's tracking individual soldiers by the pitch of their voice, the displacement of water, the direction of their movement. Neuroscientists call this compensatory plasticity. When you lose one sense, the brain doesn't just adjust, it radically rewires. Schmid's hearing becomes so acute, he can tell the difference between a soldier at 15 yards versus 20 yards just by the echo pattern of their footsteps in water. He fires in calculated bursts. 5 seconds, adjust, 5 seconds. The Japanese are screaming banzai, and to them it's a war cry meant to terrify. To Schmid, every scream is a GPS coordinate. He's converting sound into targeting data automatically. The belt feeds through his hands. He can feel the temperature of each individual round. Hot round means the gun is reaching critical heat. Cold round means he's got capacity. His fingers detect a 0.2 millimeter misalignment in the belt. That's the precursor to a jam. He clears it by touch. In total darkness, while bullets are sparking off his gun shield, and here's where it gets truly horrifying from the Japanese perspective. They throw grenades at his position. The gun keeps firing. They bring in mortar teams. The gun keeps firing. Japanese officers start screaming that they're fighting a demon or a ghost. Some soldiers literally refuse to advance because they think they're being punished by supernatural forces. They're not entirely wrong. Schmid has stopped being a man in the traditional sense. His entire consciousness has collapsed into a feedback loop. Sound input, trigger response, belt management, cooling water adjustment. He's operating at a level of focus that modern psychologists call flow state on steroids. Time distortion, pain suppression, ego dissolution. He's not Al Schmid anymore. He's the weapon, and the weapon doesn't stop. 24:05 a.m. Schmid has fired 680 rounds. His hands are blistering. The skin is literally bubbling from the heat. But here's what the history books don't tell you. Schmid is tracking the battle through smell now, too. He can smell Japanese soldiers at different ranges, sweat at 30 yards, gun oil at 20, blood at 10. He's adjusting fire based on scent gradients. This is beyond anything in the Marine Corps manual. This is human evolution happening in real time. The brain activating sensory processing abilities that most people never access their entire lives. Lee Diamond is still calling targets, but his voice is getting weaker.
He's losing blood. His whispers are becoming harder to hear over the gunfire, so Schmid starts reading his breathing patterns. When Diamond inhales sharply, Fret is close. When he exhales slowly, Schmid is on target. They've become a two-man organism, one nervous system distributed across two bodies. If you're finding this level of detail valuable, do me a favor and hit that like button. It tells the algorithm this kind of deep research matters. 4 a.m. The Japanese launch their final assault. Colonel Ichiki personally leads it with his katana drawn. This is a medieval tactic meeting industrial warfare. They make it 12 feet into the river. Schmid cuts down the entire officer corps in 18 seconds. 47 men. The water doesn't just turn red, it becomes opaque with blood. And then, silence. The splashing stops, the screaming stops. Schmid's finger is still on the trigger, but there's nothing left to shoot at. His hands have locked onto the grips, the blistered flesh has fused to the metal. He physically cannot let go. When the relief force arrives at dawn, they find him still in firing position, eyes destroyed, hands welded to the gun. And in front of his position, they count bodies. 203 confirmed kills. The entire Ichiki Regiment is combat ineffective. Over half are dead. The rest are scattered in the jungle. But here's the detail that makes this story even more insane. When they pry Schmid off the gun and examine his position, they find something shocking. He was out of water for the cooling jacket for the last 90 minutes. The barrel should have warped, should have been unusable. But Schmid had unconsciously adjusted his rate of fire to compensate. Shorter bursts, longer pauses. He was managing barrel temperature by pure tactile feedback through the grips. Engineers later calculated that he was operating within a 2-degree margin of error. If he'd fired any faster, the gun would have failed. Any slower, the Japanese would have overrun him. He was threading a needle he couldn't see, using math he didn't consciously know. That's not training, that's something else. Al Schmid received the Navy Cross, but here's what actually happened after the war that nobody talks about. He underwent 17 eye surgeries, not the 23 that some sources claim, 17 brutal operations where they tried to reconstruct something from the scar tissue. He got partial vision back in his left eye, about 15% of normal, just enough to see shapes, not faces, not details, just the difference between light and dark. He went back to Philadelphia, worked in a factory, married his girlfriend, had 3 kids, never talked about Guadalcanal unless directly asked, and when he was asked, his answer was always the same. I didn't do anything special, I just didn't quit. But here's my take, and this is why I think this story matters in 2024.
Schmid represents something we've completely lost in modern combat. We've built weapon systems that remove the human element, drones, AI targeting, remote warfare. And in doing so, we've forgotten what humans are actually capable of when every technological advantage is stripped away. Schmid had no night vision, no thermal imaging, no computer-assisted targeting. He had burned hands, destroyed eyes, and a 103-pound machine gun. That's it. And he held off an entire regiment, not because of technology, because of will, because of adaptability, because his brain could rewire itself in 4 hours to do things that shouldn't be biologically possible. Al Schmid, paralyzed from the shoulders down by the end of the battle, spent the rest of his life saying the same thing. I was Al's eyes, but he was our survival. He could have left me, should have left me, but he stayed. Diamond died in 1979. Schmid died in 1982. At Schmid's funeral, Diamond's son read a letter his father had written. In it, Diamond said that for 4 hours, he and Al Schmid weren't 2 people, they were one weapon system that refused to break. And that's the real story here. This isn't about one superhuman Marine. It's about what happens when 2 ordinary men refuse to accept defeat, even when defeat is the only logical outcome. So here's my final question, and I really want you to think about this. Schmid made a choice in that first second after the grenade. He could have crawled away, gotten medical help, saved himself. Nobody would have blamed him. But he stayed. He stayed blind, in pain, with a dead friend next to him and a paralyzed friend behind him, and he held the line. What would you have done? And I'm not asking for the heroic answer. I'm asking for the honest one. Drop it in the comments. Let's talk about it. And if this story hit you the way it hit me, share this video. These men deserve to be remembered for what they actually did, not the sanitized version. Subscribe if you want more deep dives into the technical reality of warfare. I'll see you in the next one.